The reading this morning is John 8, verses 31 through 36. So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. They answered him, We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free? Jesus answered them, Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who practices sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed.
Good morning, church. It is so good to see you this morning and to get to spend this time together in worship and in fellowship that brings to us, and just to be able now to spend some time in the truth from God's Word. I hope that as you were coming in this morning, whether you are a guest or one of our regulars here, that you got a family report. There is an outline on the back page to go along with this message, and that'll help us to track some of the ideas and put them all together. So if you didn't get one of those and you want one, you can raise a hand. Alex has just a few copies back there that we can spread around that can be helpful. Yep, looks like we got one here in the middle and one on this side, Alex, okay? What a joy to be with you. We do have a lot of guests with us today, and that's a bit unusual this time of year. We're used to y'all coming in the summertime. What are you doing here now? We're glad to have you today, and glad that we get to spend this time together doing things that are of true importance in view of God and reality. I want to say a special word of thanks to our church family before I get going with the message, because for the first time since I have been the deacon in charge of setting up Bible class teachers, we have a full teaching roster 2 full weeks before the quarter starts, and I am so grateful for that. Thank you truly, sincerely, for your willingness to minister to our kids in that way. I really, truly appreciate it, and just wanted to let you know publicly what a big deal I think that is. And the second shout out, I guess, that I wanted to give for this morning is, I noticed this morning that there have been a lot of crying babies in this room, and that is a good thing. It really is a good thing as a sign of the vibrancy and the liveliness of a church family. When you've got little kids crying in your assemblies, that means there's little kids in these assemblies. What a gift from God. And so, I know that it can become distracting, and I know the Bible has a little to say about distraction in worship assemblies, but I also know the Bible has a good deal more to say about patience and about letting little children come to the Savior. And that is why I'm grateful for that sound today. And it is just a gift from God. So, to the parents, thank you. I know it's a struggle. I know it's a struggle. I have the easier end of it because I get up here for 40 minutes out of the service and left my wife to deal with the struggle. But I still sat through the struggle sometimes, and I know, and I appreciate it. You are doing the work of God for your kids, and I appreciate it and wanted you to know that. All right, let's talk a little bit about the subject matter for today. Let me start by saying this. Truth is truth, no matter how appealing the devil may make the lie. One of my favorite songs from one of my favorite musicals asks this question. The stone that sits on the very top of the mountain's mighty face, does it think that it's more important than the stones that form the base? Now, when you really start to think about that, there's an obvious truth in that, isn't it? Because which stones are the most important ones in a mountain? The ones that sit on the very top? No, the stones at the foundation make the mountain. They are the most important stones in that mountain. And so it just reminds us of the importance of foundations, that the thing at the bottom that bears the weight of everything else is the most important part of a magnificent structure like that. So if you were to think about the foundations of Christianity in terms of that kind of mountain, what would be the stones at the base? What would be some of the big foundational concepts that bear up the weight of everything else in the structure that is Christianity? I don't know what they would all be, but I got to tell you that one of them has to be the concept of truth. Truth is one of the most foundational ideas to the entirety of reality itself. And if we're going to understand reality itself the right way, then we better understand it through the filter of how God teaches us reality. The Christian way of looking at the world is built on a foundation of absolute truth. And the need for truth is very difficult to overstate. The power of truth is difficult to overstate, especially when compared to the practical uselessness and destructive power of lies. Jesus said in the reading from just a minute ago, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." A lie does not have that same power. Even though Satan told the woman in the garden that she would receive true freedom if she ate the forbidden fruit, the truth was that it cost her and her husband their freedom. It made them slaves instantly to all sorts of things that they didn't have to deal with before. And that dichotomy between truth and lies is always present in the Scriptures. It's always with us. The lie will enslave us and destroy us, and the truth will give us freedom and life. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to talk to you about one particular way that I think sometimes as believers we get drawn into believing a lie. At least we get tempted to believe in this lie, and it can be a really strong temptation for those of us who believe. I want us to go in our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 23 this morning, and I want to show you some ideas from that chapter's teachings that give us wisdom in how we look at the unchristian world around us. Now, normally, I don't so much talk in terms of here versus there, us versus them. I don't so much talk about that as though, what happens here is Christianity and what happens out everywhere else can't be Christianity. It's not necessarily always like that, but today it is. Today what I want us to do is I want us to talk about how we as believers look at the outside world. And in one particular way, I want to remind us to be careful not to get too attached and too drawn toward a lie that the world tells us. And that lie is basically this. The lie is that the people who don't believe in God have a more free and easy and carefree lifestyle than those who do. I know that sometimes we look at the world and we are envious of the way that sinners live their lives. At least we are tempted to be envious of the way that sinners live their lives. I know that struggle is real because I hear some Christians say it. And I know that struggle is real because I know my own heart. And I can confess to you that I have had the same inclinations, that I have occasionally envied sinners for the seeming joy and freedom and excitement and carefree nature that their life seems to come with. And so I know that this is a real thing because of our experiences. But can I just point out to you right away in this text, I know this is a real thing because the Bible warns us not to let it take hold of us. Proverbs chapter 23, look at verse 17. In verse 17, Solomon warns, "Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of Yahweh all the day." Well, the question is, why would we envy sinners? Can I have the clicker? Mine just failed me. The question is, why would we envy sinners? What possible reason would we have to think that they have it better off than we do? The Bible is full to the rafters of people's words about how wonderful God is, how He provides everything that we need, how people can't get enough of Him. They are hungering and thirsting for His righteousness. If we're good Christians, we would never need to be warned about this, about envying sinners, right? But can I just tell you, and this is the honesty part of this morning's message, here are some of the reasons that I've thought of why we, Jesus' faithful disciples, end up envying those who live without God. I think sometimes we envy the guy who advances at work and who gets raise after raise by manipulating the system and devaluing the people around him. And we kind of wish, even though we know we shouldn't, that we didn't have that same standard of behavior. We didn't have a standard of behavior to live up to, so that we could do that sort of thing and not feel any guilt about it. I think sometimes we envy the neighbor 3 doors down the street who drives a brand new Range Rover every 2 years and he just lives under a mountain of debt. And we kind of look at that and we go, I wish that I didn't know how damaging debt would be, and then I could do that too, and that would be fun. I think sometimes in our college years, we look at our acquaintances or friends who drink heavily, party every weekend, regularly commit fornication, dress incredibly immodestly, and they seem to live a carefree life. And we look at that and we go, I kind of wish I didn't have the conscience that would bother me so much, and the people in my life who would check on me if I lived like that. I think sometimes we look at our friends who aren't Christians, that are a little bit later in life, and their kids are grown, and their kids are living in some sort of openly sinful lifestyle, like fornication or homosexuality or substance abuse or revelry of some kind, and the parents don't seem to care a lick about those adult kids living the way they are. And those of us who are Christians who have adult kids that are living that life and hurt for those kids, we look at those, the non-Christians, and we go, man, I wish I didn't care. Because it hurts to care about my kids, and they don't seem to care at all. I wish I could be free like that. We look at a divorced friend who's just left their spouse because things were tough, and we go, yeah, well, things are tough for us too. I kind of wish that I could get out of it and feel good about it like they do. We look at classmates who regularly cheat on tests and assignments or plagiarize stuff based on other people's papers or based on ChatGPT writing it for you. And we look at that and we go, I wish I could get away with that and feel good about it. That would be really nice. And then I'd get better grades and I'd get a better job and I'd make more money and all this cheating would pay off for me like it does for them. But I can't do that. Or we look at the person on the interstate that's tailgating and speeding egregiously and weaving in and out of traffic and is getting where they're going. And we're stuck there being kind to everybody and obeying the laws, and we're wishing I wish I could drive like that. Do not poke the person next to you, okay? I think we all have moments like that. And you can fill in the blank with whatever rings the bells for you. If there's ever been a moment in your life where you went, I kind of wish I wasn't a Christian because it would be nice to ... then that's the kind of thing that I think Solomon is warning us about right here. That we find ourselves envious of those who just don't feel compelled to keep to the same moral and spiritual commitments that we have. They don't feel the guilty conscience. They don't have any accountability to fellow Christians who are going to check on them and ask, are you really living your life for Christ as you should? And we look at them and we go, that seems more free. Can I tell you that when we look at all of those, basically our jealousies boil down to 3 categories. We find ourselves jealous sometimes that sinners seem free to revel, to just enjoy whatever they want to enjoy, to be completely unconcerned with how it affects other people and the long-term consequences for themselves, and especially the eternal consequences for themselves. We look at their lives and we go, wouldn't it be nice to just do whatever I want and it be okay? We're jealous because they seem free to revel. Secondly, we sometimes envy them because we see that their loved ones are free from moral burdens, and they are free from moral burdens for their loved ones. And they don't have to ache, as I said, they don't have to ache for their kids that are wayward like we ache for our kids that are wayward or something like that. And we think they are free because of that. And thirdly, we sometimes get jealous that the ungodly seem free to excel in life, free to do really well despite the consequences and whatever it takes to get there. I know not everybody likes that old hymn, Farther Along. But I do think there's an interesting insight in the lyrics that talks about, then do we wonder why others prosper, living so wicked year after year. We do sometimes wonder about that, don't we? We look at other people when we're trying our best in an honest Christian way in our businesses, and then we look at somebody else who's completely taking advantage of the system and abusing their people, and they're winning. They're making all kinds of good results happen. They're getting rich, and they seem so happy, and we just go, I wish I could be like that. But I'm a Christian and I know better, but the struggle is there. And then I think maybe related to all of 3 of those, but not included in your chart, so you can add this to your notes if you want, is we look at non-Christians, unbelievers, and they look so free from guilt. That ungodly people look like they're just so free from guilt. And we sort of wish we could be like them in that way, that we want to become numb or jaded or immune because it just sounds so much easier than feeling guilty when we have broken one of God's laws. But you see the connection in all of that, don't you? You see the common factor through all of that? Personal freedom. That's what we think it comes down to. We long for that kind of lack of restraint, for that kind of free-breathing lifestyle that just gets what it wants, and we envy the freedom that we think we see in the sinner's world. Can I tell you that I think now, probably for all of us, the discussion doesn't sound so one-sided anymore, does it? Now it sounds like it's a little bit more real. That kind of makes sense, I think, to a lot of us. Because sometimes, y'all, it is very hard not to envy sinners. Because what we see with our eyes tells us such a powerful message that we have to learn to overcome it with our hearts, but it is right there in front of us, and it's pretty tempting to believe it the way that it looks. You see what a hard position this can put us in. And yet, Solomon's words are still there in verse 17. Let not your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of Yahweh all the day. So how's that supposed to work? What is the truth that sets us free from this lie, even when its appearance is so enticing and so tempting? There are a couple things that we need to know about all of this discussion, and Solomon's going to give them to us right here in this same chapter. Solomon's going to tell us a variety of ways that in a variety of ways, he's going to tell us that what we perceive as freedom in the sinner's life is actually all a lie. That the freedom of ungodliness is just a lie. So take a look at chapter 23. Let's look at the first 3 verses and the metaphors that he uses here to explain this to us. Solomon says, when you sit down to eat with a ruler, observe carefully what is before you, and put a knife to your throat if you are given to appetite. Do not desire his delicacies, for they are deceptive food. Keep reading verse 4, even though it stops. The marking stops right there. Do not toil to acquire wealth. Be discerning enough to desist. Here's what I think is interesting about this. Sometimes we look at the sinful world and we look at the prominent positions they occupy and we go, you know, it'd be really nice for me to get into that kind of position or to have that kind of luxury or whatever comes with sitting at the king's table. And I don't mean it in the same sense that we talked about it in communion, but sitting at a king's table and being celebrated as someone special at his table. We look at that and we think, you know, that would be really nice. But what is Solomon's advice if you find yourself in that seat? Not because you sought it and chased it and pursued that, but what is his advice if you find yourself in that seat? Don't get too comfortable with it. Now, if the advice when you're at that seat is don't get too comfortable with it, don't think you've deserved it or earned it or you're going to take a lot of it for yourself, back down the timeline of your personal life. And it reminds us, the thing that you think you want up there at that high table position, it's not always all it's cracked up to be. You think you want everything that these sinners have had, but you get there and you find out it's a pretty dangerous place to be. The freedom that it seems to give, the prestige, the honor, the excitement, there's something hiding underneath that. That freedom is a lie. And then in verses 13 and 14, we have the instructions for disciplining and teaching children, which is something that the ungodly people often don't feel compelled to do. And we might look across the table at the ungodly people and think, you know, I wish I didn't care how my kids behave and how they turn out. Well, that's all well and good, but listen to these words from verses 13 and 14. Do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you strike him with the rod, you will save his soul from Sheol. I know it's real tempting to look at the freedom of somebody that doesn't have to be bothered with the condition of their kids' souls. But at the same time, that freedom that we think we see in them is a lie. And what he says here is, make sure that you are giving your kids the proper discipline that will save their souls. That's the truer reality. You think that you want the freedom of this other thing, but the truer reality is so much better for them see through the lie and understand the wisdom of truth. And then just the first 2 verses of chapter 24 will make this same point in a slightly different way. Verses 1 and 2 of chapter 24, another reminder that says, "Do not be envious of evil men, nor desire to be with them, for their hearts devise violence, and their lips talk of trouble." Now again, what's the common factor between all of those? The common denominator in all of Solomon's wisdom that the Holy Spirit gave him is that the freedom that appears to be in sin is built on a foundation of pain. And by the way, there's one other part of this chapter that I think it drives that home even more powerfully, and that's verses 29 through 35, where he talks about wine. Because what is it that every single culture tells us wine is for? It's for forgetting about your cares, your worries, your difficulties. It's for leaving that all behind and being free to enjoy life. But what's his advice in those verses? Who has red eyes and who has trouble and who has heartaches and headaches? Those who spend their time being drunk. Those who indulge in this thing that seems like it's going to give us pleasure. The reality of sin, brothers and sisters, is always that it shows us the foundation of this kind of pleasure is purely and only pain. Solomon is telling us the truth that sin will look good. That's how it's tempting. It will look good, but it only looks good. It's built on a foundation of pain. I saw a super good illustration of this when I lived in Florida. When I first moved to Florida, I was just driving around the neighborhoods near the college where I went, and I saw this tree that was in full bloom. It had these beautiful pink blossoms all over it. This tree, I came later to know, is called a floss silk tree. It's a tropical plant. You can't grow one here. Don't even try. And by the way, you don't want it anyway. I'll tell you why in a second. But I drove past this thing and I thought, my goodness, that's so pretty. I've never seen one just like so vibrant with color and so many blooms on it and blossoms. And it was in these people's front yard. And for a second I was like, man, I hope someday I live in a house where people drive past my house and they go, look at how pretty that place is. That's beautiful. And then like 4 weeks later, all the blooms had fallen off of this thing, and I drove past it again, and I sat and stopped and looked at it at the stop sign because I realized the branches are covered in these thorns. And that's what's really interesting about it, because at that point I decided, I don't want that tree anymore. I don't want to have to run a lawnmower around that thing. I don't want to have to watch my pretty bald head and not get scratched up when I'm going under those branches. It's just an interesting illustration of the fact that some things look really, really good. And you first see it and you go, I think I would like to have something like that. I'd like to be admired for having that. I'd like to be honored. I'd like to be looked up to. I'd like for other people to think well of me, so I'm going to have that thing. And then you do just a little bit of waiting, or a little bit of digging, or a little bit of researching, or a little bit of counsel from someone who knows life, and you find out this is all that's really there. The flowers are going to fade and blow away. This is what you're going to have to live with day in and day out. Doesn't that make a good illustration for the way that we sometimes let ourselves envy sinners? And doesn't that help you to understand why sometimes when we do that, well, all the time that we do that, what we realize is that we have let ourselves become jealous of things that are nothing but lies. Y'all, I know ignorance is bliss, but knowledge is power. And this is one of those places where the knowledge of truth gives us the ability to see past the appearances of what is evil and trying to entice us. And I think that this is an important thing for us to remember. I also think, by the way, that if you wanted some real life examples of how this all plays out, you could probably ask around in this church family and you could find out some of the people that their life story has proven these things to be true. I won't share stories from inside this church family, but I will from some other places that I've known, and no names, obviously. But I've known some Christians that during their college years, they did exactly the situation that I described earlier, where they looked at the way that worldly people were living their lives and they went, well, that looks awesome, and it doesn't look like it has any negative consequences, and so let me just give it a try. And of course, you know the rest of the story, that it led them away into some sort of substance abuse. It led them away from their families. It led them away from their faith. You know, the same sort of situations could play out and it could be observed in the families that their children look to somebody else in the church family. Their children, or themselves for that matter, look to somebody else in the church family, and they thought, you know, that person seems like they would make my life a lot better than my spouse makes my life. And I'm really jealous of their spouse's life, and I'd like to get to know them better. I'd like to be more a part of that because it looks so much better outside of where I am. And of course, they gave up their marriages, they cheated on their spouses, and they wrecked their lives in so many of those cases. Look, my point today is just to make sure that we understand that sin always does the damage that God has told us it will do. It always does the damage that God has told us it will do. Now, sometimes we may look across from the Christian view to the non-Christian view and we go, man, it doesn't look like a problem. It looks like it would solve so many of my problems. It won't. It just won't. And that's why Solomon is warning us, do not let your heart envy sinners. And so that brings us to draw two very important conclusions for this morning's message. Two conclusions about the importance of knowing and living truth rather than being jealous of the lies that Satan is telling us. Number one, truth preserves and protects. Truth preserves and protects. And more specifically, what I mean is it preserves and protects life. It seems like an obvious lesson to learn from what we've been talking about this morning, but let's just go ahead and nail it down. That the lie is always there to deceive and destroy. Truth is God's gift to preserve us and protect us. Does it come with boundaries? Yes, of course. And they're good for us. Are they difficult to wrestle with emotionally at times? Yes, of course they are. But they are always good for us. I've used this illustration before. Let me throw it in right here as well. There was a study done by a construction company that specialized in designing and building playgrounds for children's schools. And they did this study to find out how children would play on their equipment where there was a fence around the playground versus where there was no fence around the playground. And there's details that go into all of this, but basically what they found was that when children had a clear sense of boundary around the playground, that they played so much more happily and freely and vibrantly on the playground equipment they were given. But when there was no clear boundary and the playground just kind of went off infinitely into the edge of a field, they struggled to have as much fun. They had more conflicts with each other. They moved in clumps around the playground rather than spreading out and covering the whole area. And they just weren't as noisy or vibrant or happy to be there. You know what that tells me? It tells me that we are made for a proper sense of boundaries. And that when we have a proper sense of boundaries, we actually thrive. They don't squelch us. They don't destroy our ability to live a good life. They help us. They free us to live a good life. That, brothers and sisters, is what the truth is doing for us. It is protecting us. It is the proper fencing that we need to keep our lives good and healthy and right before God as they're supposed to be. And then the second lesson is that the truth of God will offer us true freedom. This is, again, part of the reading that Craig read before I jumped up here to speak. From John 8, verse 32, Jesus said, "You shall know the truth, and what will it do for you? It will make you free." That's the gift that Christ is giving us. Only God's truth will bring true freedom to those who follow it. The freedom of a good and clear conscience, the freedom from consequences of our actions. All of that comes when we pursue the truth of God. Take a look back at Proverbs 23 real quick. Go back again to verse 17. Verse 17, we base this whole thing on Solomon's instructions to not envy sinners. But look at his very next thought. Continue in the fear of the Lord all the day, and then surely there is a future, and your hope will not be cut off. That's the promise of knowing and living for God. So, two quick pieces of advice, both from this chapter. Number one, from verse 12, devote your heart to the truth. Verse 12, apply your heart to instruction and your ear to words of knowledge. Seek the truth, and you will find it with God. And number two, when you find it, do not sell it for a lie. the price is never worth it. That is always a bad deal. Do not sell the truth for a lie. And so make sure that in everything we have given our hearts to not only knowledge of the truth, but appreciation of it, that we can know what God wants from us and we can be grateful that He has told it to us to preserve us and protect us and hold us until eternity. I know that it can be easy to desire the freedom that we think we see in sinners' lives, but we know better. He has told us better things. We know that sin only brings death. We know that underneath all the pleasure lies only pain. And we know that God's truth is the only way we can find forgiveness and life. And so do not let your heart envy sinners, but continue in the fear of the Lord all the day. Truth is truth, no matter how appealing the devil may make the lie. And all of that takes us back to the passage that we started with in John chapter 8, when Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." The gospel, the good news from God, is that if you want it, you can know the truth, and you can be saved truthfully by His grace. And so if there's somebody among us today that is ready to give your life to Him and to learn how life really is and how things really are supposed to be, then you can come and talk to me. Actually, today I'm leading the song, I just remembered. You can come and talk to one of the elders about that, and we'll do our best to show you the steps that you can take to know Him and to obey Him and to live your life fully in His truth. And so if we can help you with that and you want to make it known in a public way, why don't you come forward while we stand and sing this hymn together.